Welcome back to the show. Today we're remembering Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish, who passed away last week. From London, I'm joined by Adaf Suef, and from New York, I'm joined by Natalie Handel. And on the phone from San Antonio in Texas, here in the United States, I'm joined by Naomi Shihab Nye. But before we begin with those three guests, let's hear from Mark Strand, the Poet Laureate of the United States from 1990 to 1991. He joins me now on the telephone from New York. Mark, your thoughts today on the death of Mahmoud Darwish?
Well, first of all, I was shocked, and I'd always thought had he lived, he'd win the Nobel Prize. I put him in that rare category of writer. He was only 67, I think, and I met him only once in Madrid a few years ago. We read together and had an extended conversation, and I liked him enormously. And I thought, well, he was not only interesting, but brilliantly interesting. It's interesting, in addition, we read on two separate nights, although we had an extended conversation. The night I read, there were only 60 or 70 people there. But on the night he read, there were hundreds and hundreds, and many more hundreds that couldn't get into the room. It was simply packed. So, he was much more than a poet to a great many people. He was a sort of living conscience. He spoke for, a people dispossessed, and in some ways, he wished he were thought more as a poet and less as a an iconic figure. But there was no question in my mind that he was a terrific poet. And, when he read his poems, I was very moved. And, of course, when I read them in translation. They didn't seem to. Well, I don't know the original, but they seemed pretty terrific in translation. So.
We have, Mark, we have an email that came in here. It's from Hamilton in New Zealand. It's from Zelina. And she writes, "The pen is mightier than the sword. Maybe others should follow his example." So in some respects, or in many respects, was he very much an activist poet?
Oh, of course. He wrote about, his homelessness, really. And, he was an editor, a famous editor of a newspaper that had a great readership. And, he was, that would be putting it mildly to call him an activist.
Yeah. Okay, Mark Strand, thank you for joining us from New York. That was Mark Strand, the Poet Laureate in the United States from 1990 to 91, talking to us there. We also have a caller on the line now. This is Marwan calling from Switzerland. Marwan, go ahead with your question. Hello, Marwan, are you there? No, I think we've lost Marwan. Let me go to Naomi in San Antonio in Texas. As Mark Strand mentioned there, that there were hundreds and hundreds of people attending his poetry reading recital there. And his readings typically attracted audiences sometimes that numbered thousands, and that typically doesn't happen to many poets. What was it that drew such large audiences to him?
Yes, you're right, and I loved that comment. He had that he had that radiant kind of spirit, the being. People wanted to be in the circle of his words, in the flesh. And I remember when Natalie and I approached with him the auditorium at Swarthmore in Pennsylvania, where he was going to give a reading, and there were about 1,000 people outside, and Darwish said, "Why are they keeping them outside? Why aren't they letting them in?" And it turned out that was the overflow crowd, that indoors was already packed. And I think that he had just a mesmerizing effect on an audience. He had such a beautiful voice, such an elegance, and people who had a chance to hear someone who stood for justice in a way they needed to hear it described. Because I think many times we believe in certain issues of justice, but we also need to have an artistic relationship with that. We need to see images related to it. We need to be moved. And he could do all of those things at once.
Let's go to the phones again. We have a caller from London. Anwar is calling us from London. Anwar, go ahead with your question.
Oh, hello, good evening. I just wanted to comment, what a pity that, while this Mahmoud Darwish and many others like him, we only appreciate their work and their thoughts and their struggle after they have left this world. I wish people take notice of those people who are still alive and they want to bring peace and justice to all the people in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Anwar calling us from New York there. Let's go to Natalie in New York. Natalie, we were talking there about the huge audiences that Mahmoud Darwish was able to attract, sometimes numbering in the thousands. But as I understand it, he wasn't very comfortable in public. Was he a bit of a loner?
Mahmoud was a very private person, and he was also extremely shy. But when he went on stage, it's as if the world, and I'm so happy that Mark and Naomi spoke about that, and of course I've heard him read many times, but I particularly remember one day him reading in Paris, and he walked on stage and suddenly there was a tremendous silence. It was as if the world had, the audience has just stopped and had gone to silence because they needed to hear his voice. And his voice and his words sort of became an echo of the earth. And it felt like a sacred moment. So I think Mahmoud really had that power and that brilliance on stage. But nonetheless, he was a shy person.
Well, let's go back to the phone lines. I think Marwan in Switzerland has managed to get back to us. Marwan, go ahead.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Now?
Go ahead.
I just would like to say that although I'm not a Palestinian myself, express the deepest sorrow that I feel today, especially watching his funeral. As a child, I grew up in Lebanon and listened to his words. And one sung by the famous Lebanese singer, Khalifa. We all really owe this great poet, especially for the greatest gift he's given us all. When he sung and he wrote about missing his mother. His words, through the songs until today, it really, I wouldn't be exaggerating if I say it has shaped my life. Every time I remember my mother, I find myself singing that song. And it's so powerful that, for me, when I think about his work, I feel, in a way, he wrote a lot about the resistance, yet having heard his poems, a few times, you are unable to resist wanting to hear it and sing his words again and again.
Okay.
And I think it's so powerful. I just hope that the Palestinian people realize this great loss, and I hope it would be a cause for their, for them to unite again for this beautiful cause they have, and I hope they arrive to a just solution.
Marwan, we have to move on. Thank you very much. Adaf, I just want to address one aspect of his work very quickly. We just have about a minute left. I was just wondering if you could tell us, how was his work received in Israel? As I understand it, the former Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon, was a big fan of his poetry.
Well, I don't think that Darwish would have reciprocated. I don't think that he was a big fan of Sharon's statesmanship. But of course, Darwish actually sort of read and spoke Hebrew. He did a lot of readings inside the 48 line. He did interviews. And one of the things that came through in his poetry was he addressed Israelis a lot. Either as the enemy or as somebody caught up in a struggle, sort of saying, what would have happened if you had waited before you shot. One of the most famous products of his partnership with Marcel Khalifa is the song to an Israeli
I'm going to have to interrupt
girl,
there.
Rita.
I'm going to have to interrupt there. I'm sorry, we've run out of time. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to Natalie Handel,
Thank
Adaf
you.
Soyef and Naomi Shihab Nai, who joined us from Texas. And thank you for being with us. On the next show, Riz will be back speaking to environmentalist Paul Watson about some of his controversial actions to save the planet. Join us at the same time.